One of the interesting things about near-future video game worlds is that they help visualize how technological and design progress actually emerges in the real world. In Deus Ex: Mankind Divided, I'd say that there are three main categories of items that showcase how this kind of progress manifests itself. Number one is consumables. This of course covers one-use items, but I'd also like to stretch its definition to items like phones, computers, and even fashion that have a relatively short upgrade cycle. Number two is longer-term investments like vehicles, weapons, and furniture. These items take longer to replace as they don't become markedly obsolete in a short time. The last category is infrastructure like buildings and parks. These would only be replaced with newer infrastructure for specific projects, and otherwise they would be renovated to incorporate new design in them. Let's start off by looking at the consumables. These are the most up-to-date and most futuristic objects in the in-game world. You'll find daring designs on the clothes that the people of Prague are wearing, while computers and phones contrast sharply to much of the cobblestone-covered Prague. TVs are prominent with their sleek, transparent design, having clearly benefited from advances in display technology, which can also be observed on other screen objects in the world. These objects are simply from an entirely different age, and as such they would stick out if it weren't for the absolute saturation of them. Phones and computers are thin and sleek, while newspapers and books have been partly replaced by e-readers. This partial replacement is quite intriguing. You can find physical magazines and books throughout the world, but they don't seem to sell as well as they did previously. The introduction of presumably cheap digital reader products have thereby not revolutionized written content, but have instead given customers more options. We see the same thing today. You can get your news and magazines on digital surfaces, but this has not replaced newspapers or books for that matter. Returning to clothing, you note that the general design aesthetics are shared across different clothing. As such, this is indicative of the current design and fashion cycle, which will surely rapidly change over time, as is the case today in our real-life world. With regards to the longer-term investments, you'll see that these are also decidedly futuristic. Vehicles look as if they've gone through a complete design cycle or two to seem suitably futuristic from the vehicles of today, while the same can be said about weapons and furniture. They are, however, still completely recognizable. Fridges, washing machines, and ovens in particular seem to be very similar to the appliances we use today. This indicates the longer upgrade cycle of these longer-term investments. Few people buy a new oven just for fun. Cabinets, chairs, and so on similarly seem to be suitably modern without being completely unrecognizable, like many of the consumable items are. Vending machines, for example, look very recognizable with their general design and functionality being intact. The one obvious improvement is that they're covered in digital screens. The most intriguing category to me is that of infrastructure. You'll find massive futuristic blades stretching over the skyline, screens hanging from the rooftops and attached to buildings, while many signs are digital and thus easily malleable. But the city itself is old. Many of the roads are made of cobblestone, while the majority of the buildings are much older than the technology that surrounds them. And of course they are. You don't tear down a building unless absolutely necessary, and even if there are many digital signs, this doesn't mean that all signs are replaced with digital variants. You'll find a bunch of analog signage. If the info on them is up to date, why replace them? But back to the buildings. You will see modern, futuristic elements in them. If there are significant ways to improve upon these buildings, you, pun intended, augment them. That can be observed in many of the modern interiors that have clearly been changed throughout the building's life cycle. Furthermore, there has, as previously demonstrated, been massive improvements in digital displays. As such, many of these have been added onto these older buildings, while digital locks hold the doors secure. Sure, there are futuristic buildings in the world, but these, as opposed to the consumables, stick out as they're not saturating the world to the same degree. The Palisade Bank, for example, sticks out like a sore thumb next to the small cafes that surround it. And it's this point I want to end on. When upgrading to a newer design or technology, you always must consider the costs of doing so, comparing the old with the new. And it's for this simple reason that the future isn't a massive wave that changes everything in one fell swoop. Instead, the future creeps up on you. And it's only when looking back that you'll notice how much has changed.